This episode is brought to you by Anchor.fm. If you haven't heard of Anchor, you should definitely check them out. It's a super easy tool that anyone can use to create and distribute their podcast. It has everything you need, and you can do it all from your computer or even your phone. Need your podcast cover art? There's a tool. Music and sound effects? They have you covered. Want to record on the fly? It's easy with the app. Now you may be saying to yourself, I already have a podcast. No worries, just create your account, upload, and publish to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. Looking for some walking around money? Anchor connects you with advertisers who match your brand. It's a one-stop shop for all of your podcasting needs. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Hello and welcome to BizQuik. I'm Corey.
And I'm Julie.
And today we have Anne Laguzza of The Works Consulting. She's out of Long Beach, California. Welcome, Anne.
That's right. You're listening to BizQuik. This is where Julie and Corey provide quick and useful information to small business owners. BizQuik is the podcast where small business owners get to showcase their businesses and receive expert advice and guidance in areas many entrepreneurs struggle with. And you, the listener, get solutions, tips, and tricks on real-world topics that many small business owners face. Julie and Corey are the experts small businesses hire when they need solutions. And the BizQuik podcast is just one way they deliver those solutions. Let's start the show.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. It's really nice to have you. Thanks for taking the time.
Absolutely. I'm very excited.
Yeah, so are we. This is one of our favorite topics, and I think something that a lot of small business owners need more information on. So this should be really helpful. And with that, tell us what exactly The Works Consulting is and why you started this business.
So The Works Consulting provides human resources consulting and leadership development services. And I started the business 19 years ago, really honestly, just because I wanted to be self-employed is a true story. I thought that I'd sort of worked in-house for 10 years in manager and director of human resources and training roles. I changed jobs about every 2 years. And so I think that I forever wanted to be a consultant. But what I enjoyed the most about those opportunities is I was brought in to build up HR departments, maybe basically turn around situations and then move on and do something else. So that aspect of it I really loved. And I thought that kind of matched perfectly with consulting. So, so I got my business started to try to reach out and help as many people as I possibly could.
Nice. What's the most common misconception that people have about HR?
Okay, so really nobody likes HR. Let's be honest.
True, that's true.
Nobody likes HR. And you know what? I'll be perfectly honest with you guys, rightfully so. I think there are a lot of HR people that are really feel like they have to say no and they fight and they don't understand that they need to fit into the business. So of course, they have to help a business be compliant. And of course, there's rules and laws and all of that. But there's plenty of ways to do that and be in alignment with how a business wants to operate. So that's like a big piece of what I think I've been able to do in my career differently is that I understand it's a business first, and then HR has got to work in that business rather than it being all about just yes, no, yes, no. You know, one of the most valuable things somebody told me early on in my career is your answer is always yes. So can I terminate this employee? Yes. Can I reorganize my department? Yes. Whatever the answer is, it's always yes. So so people aren't coming to you and hearing no all the time. Then you educate them on what that yes means. So can I terminate this employee? I haven't written them up. They have no idea it's coming. They've worked for me for 10 years. Yes, you absolutely can. Let's look at some of the risk that might be involved if you do that. And let's look at how we can reduce risk if we maybe put these steps into place instead. That was a super valuable piece of advice because it got me out of that. No, you can't, no, you can't, no, you can't, which is what I think everybody thinks HR does is just says no. And then they start circumventing HR. So they don't have to go work with them anymore.
Yeah. And we've definitely had plenty of experience with people circumventing HR and just terrible HR experiences. And I'm sure everybody on listening to this pod has as well. Can you go back and give us an example of how you kind of integrate HR into the company? You said that, there's many ways to be a part of the business.
Yeah. I mean, first is I always have understood that the business is the priority and people have to, be profitable and successful and all of that. I don't want it to be at the expense of employees, which is kind of where my leadership development side comes in, because I really spend a lot of time teaching leaders how to treat their teams better so that they are more productive. But I think you have to understand the business. You have to try to look at, okay, I have rules. And the one thing about HR is that there are these clear rules that you have to follow, but how do I fit those rules into the business that we're doing, I guess. So it's sort of taking each situation and saying, what's our end goal? And then sort of backing into it. So again, if we're trying to reorganize a department and we're having some issues here and there, how do we back into that, knowing that these are the laws and these are kind of what we have to do? And then, in all honesty, and I just coached an HR person on this the other day, is sometimes I've said, your job is to inform. Your job isn't to hold the line every single day. And leaders are going to make decisions that are not in alignment with what you're recommending. For me, my goal was always to get leaders listening to me, 80 to 90% of the time, because that's a huge win, right? If they're feeling that comfortable with the advice I'm giving and they're coming to me for that, I know that's great. But so many HR professionals get stuck in the no and the resistance and thinking that it's like their job to, like, if they do this, it's going to be da da da. It's like your job is to inform and let people make a decision.
What's the correlation between a good leader and HR?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I believe that if you're a good leader, the HR sort of compliance rules sort of fall much lower on the scale, because you're probably you're just not even battling that, because you're trying to be a good leader. You're trying to engage your employees. You're listening to them. You're really being active in their role. And it's funny how those little other issues sort of aren't even a problem anymore, because if you're general, it's so funny. I share the story a lot, but I have a leader that I work with who he's just such a good leader. And I'm going to tell you, there are times when he hasn't exactly done what the law should have been because he didn't know, but because he was really coming from this place of trying to do the right thing, I think it's how it worked out really well for him. Now, we corrected that in California in particular. We're really strict on laws, so we have to make sure he's following those. But I think that says a lot about him and about the fact that if you're trying to do the right thing, most of those other issues become non-issues. And I think that's where my business really transitioned in the last 5 years, is it was like, compliance is important, but it's really not the most important thing. The most important thing is how we're treating our employees and trying to get the best out of them every single day.
Sorry, I was just going to say that's a really, it's a great correlation to be able to identify what strong leaders do for an organization and with respect to HR.
Yeah.
I was going to say the exact same thing. Just joking. So if you're dealing with leaders who, like, let's say, that, like, you give them advice, they're going to make the decision that you don't want them to make. Are you out there making, like, contingency plans or mitigation strategies or anything, because that something's going to happen down the line?
Yeah, definitely. So for anybody who's kind of in a human resources role, and as a consultant, I do this also, but there's always someone who needs to know that maybe, like, the ship's headed in the wrong direction, right? So whoever that is. And that's why it's interesting. I know you guys work with a lot of the smaller businesses, but when people start to grow and add in someone who's handling the human resources function, even if that's not a full-time person, I always want that person to report to the top leader of the company, the CEO, the president, whoever it is. And the reason is because in those moments where it's like, okay, everything's going exactly opposite of what I'm recommending, or I don't think this is a good idea, they're able, without, any worry about repercussion or going around their supervisor, to go straight to the top person. And sometimes it's that person. I worked with a company, it was family owned. We had 600 employees, and, my president didn't always agree with me. But I had at least informed him and done what I needed to do. So that's where, and at the end of the day, what I always say to people, if you have to make at some point, you're going to have to assess if that's a match for you. If you're continuing to advise and no one's listening to you, one, you have to look at yourself. Are you advising in a way that they can hear you? And then if you really feel you are, and they're still not listening to you, then maybe that's not the organization for you.
Interesting. And I guess I never really thought about that the HR person could greatly benefit from reporting straight to the top. When you're talking about smaller businesses, right? So you are a small business.
Yes.
And I want to get into, some moments that you've had as a small business and what, sort of more of your story. But before we go in that direction, I wanted to ask you, when is it appropriate for a small business to seek an HR consultant?
That's a great question. I mean, you can seek obviously at any time, but usually it seems like about 10 people is a good time. I also like to joke about, it's like when you stopped being able to hire your friends and family and you hire the first person who's not related to you or been your best friend since high school. A lot of times that's the time too, but usually about 10 people seems reasonable. I do have some clients who are smaller than that, 3 to 5 people. And it often is because they just it's not usually, a situation where you need to be in there all the time, but it's something has come up and they need some help getting through some things. And also, of course, being where I do a lot of my HR works in California, there are a lot of crazy laws that come out here. So people who are much smaller need help sooner because they're trying to navigate a lot of things that they don't understand. But I would say under normal circumstances, it seems like, 10, you want to start thinking about, I probably could use somebody else's eyes on this occasionally to take a look at what we're doing.
And what does that look like exactly for those, like when you initially start working for somebody? Is it just kind of like you're on retainer, you give them 10 hours a month, or what does that look like?
So usually I start with what's called a human resources audit, and we assess all their HR operations from top to bottom. And I start all the way at the beginning of how do you bring people into the company? How do you pay them? How do you manage their performance? How do you train them? How do you keep morale up? And then all the way to how do you move them out of the company? And then that gives us like a really good roadmap for sort of what's going well, where could you improve, and where can I support you best at that time? And for me, I prioritize that in terms of what's sort of urgent and what's best practice. Because there are things, sometimes people are doing great, but it's like, oh my gosh, you've got this down. This is great. You know what you could do to make it even better? And then I help them prioritize that so they can determine, what do I need to do right now? What maybe it could be in 6 months, what's maybe a year down the road. But that's usually where I start. And then we decide from that point how it works. If it's a certain hours a month, certain hours per month that they need me, or if it's just sort of a project base or as needed.
Okay. Let's shift gears just a little bit and talk about you as a small business. Right. And tell us about, your biggest struggle as a small business owner, or that big lesson learned.
Yeah. So, I mean, I always feel like I have two, but I'm going to go with the one. So around 2007 and 2008, when everything sort of crashed in the world and the economy was terrible. So I started my business in 2001. And I had done pretty well. I found this really big client during that time, though. I think I ended up working with them for 3 years, and it was supposed to be just a few months assignment. And they kept taking more and more of my hours, more and more of my time. So I gave them probably 80 to 90% of my business. So really, if I'm being honest, looking back, felt like less of a business owner at that point and more of an employee, really, but, as a consultant. But you know what? I was still relatively new in my business. I was about 6 years in. It felt great, making great money. They loved me. I loved the work. I got to do everything. I got to do the human resources. I got to facilitate workshops for their leaders. I got to do coaching. So I was doing everything I wanted to do. And I had the freedom that I wanted to have. So they brought me in to a meeting. I'll never forget this meeting. And they said, well, we have to tell you that we're ending your contract immediately. And not only are we ending your contract immediately, but we cannot pay you anything that we owe you up to this point.
Ouch.
And I was like, what? I mean, I even just got chills right now. I mean, I was like, whoa. And I, as a small business owner, I'm having a good time, thinking this is really good. I didn't have any employees at that time. I had let them get behind in billing, so they owed me quite a bit of money. And I remember I came home that day and I was thinking, holy smokes, what am I going to do? Right? Like, what am I going to do? Like, I just sort of lost everything in one day. And, you have that feeling of like, I almost started having that feeling of like, how could I save it? Like, maybe I could do this and maybe I could do that. But they were literally like, we're in trouble. Like, we are in financial trouble and we are cutting everywhere we can. And, what's also just, about this story that I have to tell you is I had sat in on many meetings where they were cutting staff because they were going through such tough times, but no one ever said a word like, oh, and by the way, as soon as you're done helping us with all this, we're getting rid of you. So I still remember that day. And it's so funny now that we're all back working from home. I have a home office and I came into my home office again and kind of sat here and went, like, I literally remember I picked up my phone, made sure my phone worked. And I was like, what am I going to do? Like, I have no idea what I'm going to do. So financially, fortunately, I had always been really good at saving. So although it was scary, it wasn't like I had, tons of money coming in. I knew I'm like, okay, I'm going to be okay for a few months, but literally, what am I going to do right now? So I just started, I had a few little random clients. I reached out to them, but I reached out to an attorney that I'd done a lot of work for before and was kind of like, hey, I'm available again. Is there anything you have for me? And then two really important things happened that forever changed my career at that moment. One was I had met a HR professional who also facilitated workshops at the beginning of my business in 2001. And he called me and said, hey, there's a university here called Cal State Dominguez, and we have an HR certificate program. You do it at night. And I was just wondering, we need a new instructor. So I was wondering if you'd like to come instruct. And then this is my favorite part about that conversation. He goes, it doesn't pay a lot of money, but it's great. It keeps you fresh on your skills and you keep facilitating, you get to meet great people. And I'm thinking, who cares how much money it pays? Like, I'll take anything right now. I don't have any money coming in. So I got that gig, which I ended up doing for 7 years. I taught adults basically 3 times a week for 7 years. It was an amazing, amazing opportunity. And then the other thing that happened is one of my former clients called me within about a week of that phone call and said, we had to terminate our HR professional. And we're wondering if you could help us, one, get this mess organized, and then tell us, what we need going forward, who we should hire, all of that. And I was like, absolutely. So they were in Sonoma. So I started flying up to Sonoma County, which is in Northern California, every single week. And I'd go for a couple of days and just sort everything out. So those two things were what I needed to like push me over the hump. And then I had to rebuild my business. So basically I started my business in 2001 with nothing. And I had to rebuild it all over again in 2007, basically with nothing. I mean, fortunately, I'd done a little bit of work, obviously, and I'd made some impressions on people, thank goodness, but it was terrible. I was so nervous.
Yeah, probably a lot of small business owners can relate to that. A couple of things that I want to just mention. First, so important that, you're constantly building relationships and planting those seeds, because some things just take years to grow, but the relationship part of being a small business owner is so important. And you just never know when things are going to come back to you. So it's just really important to always be, a good representative of your business. The second thing is, I want to point out that they teach in like 7th grade English this concept called foreshadowing. And like, perhaps there was a lot of it going on for you in that with that client, but wow, I'm glad that you were able to turn it around and everything was okay.
I mean, me too. And I'm with you. It's funny that you say that about I just was coaching a small business owner yesterday, and he's like brand new. He's all by himself. And I said, hey, what's going on with your marketing? And he's like, well, I'm doing really well. I don't really feel like I need to market yet. And I'm like, oh, hold on. Like, I would rather have people calling you right now and you saying, gosh, my list is full, but I'll put you on the waiting list than I'll just start marketing today because my clients dropped off. I'm like, that's going to be way harder. So I agree. I feel like you just never know who you run into in the grocery store, at parties. I mean, you just never know. So you always want to be connecting with people as best as you can.
Mm-hmm.
We wanted to take a quick break to tell you more about SB Pace, the small business consulting company that makes this podcast possible. SB Pace, which stands for Small Business Planning, Advising, Coaching, Expertise, focuses solely on helping small businesses and entrepreneurs. Are you looking to start a small business of your own? SB Pace can get you up and running with a solid foundation that's built to last. Are you an existing small business in a slump or just looking for ways to improve what you do? We can help with that. Are you ready to take your business to the next level? SB Pace is the partner you need. You can find out more about SB Pace and what we have to offer by visiting our website, sbpace.com.
And I want to get into current events, and without getting too political or anything, but we live in a world now where everything offends everyone, and you can probably place wagers on the next executive who's going to get fired for making the comment. What are your suggestions for small businesses and how to avoid that, and when they should defend their employees or when they should fire them for making a bad comment or something like that?
I know. Well, okay. So, I think first, I do really think people need to be honest about, are their practices really, and I want to say discriminatory intentionally, but unintentionally. Sometimes people really are not intending to do that, but they say and do things that are not, in the world we're in today, are going to be taken much differently. And employees really are taking a lot of matters into their own hands. I've seen more letters written by employees in the last month making demands on what management does. And these aren't all big companies. One's pretty small. Both of them actually that I'm thinking of right now are smaller companies. So I think one, you just got to kind of be honest and say, okay, what are my real beliefs and how am I navigating that in this world that may not be so okay with what I'm thinking or how I'm feeling. But then I think that in terms of managing your team, I always think, one, you gotta set values of your expectations for how you want people to behave in your company, because whether it's employees or clients or anybody, you should have some expectation of how they should perform and behave. And that's your call, how that works. And then you want to hold people to that standard. And then I think that's how anytime I get, when I was in-house, for sure, I had lots of opportunities to look into claims of discrimination or harassment. And I think you just got to take each situation as it is and really try to identify what happened and then make the best decision possible based on that scenario. It's hard for me to give like a blanket answer because it could be so many different things someone's doing, right? And how long they've been with you. Is this the first time they've ever done it? Have you been clear on your expectations on how they should talk? But I don't want people saying anything to my customers or my clients either that I wouldn't want them. I guess what I'm thinking is I'm really like a firm believer. Like when we write emails in my company, I'm always like, don't write an email that you wouldn't want anybody to see. Because, it's going to take that one time we're going to accidentally forward it out, right, to the client. We're going to hit reply all or something. So I'm really like, let's all behave the way we want to be. We wouldn't care if somebody opened the door right now, any client, whoever, and walked in, we would all be acting the way we wouldn't be embarrassed by what we're saying. And I just feel like that maybe is sort of the standard small business owners want to look at.
When you say employees writing letters of demand, what can you talk more about that?
Well, they're definitely not putting up with bad management, and they're calling leaders out quicker. I think that are not treating people, whether it even be, it doesn't necessarily need to be consistently, but just like not treating them well. Like maybe they're taking anger out on them too much, or they aren't giving them opportunities to learn, or they aren't listening to them. And then they are writing demands to whoever the top position is in terms of, you need to do something about this person because they're out of control, or it doesn't appear that you're taking any action because we don't see anything, and we're going to take matters into our own hands if you don't. So it's sort of like the tolerance for bad treatment is starting to get, I guess it would be lower tolerance for bad treatment, and employees are starting to speak out.
Do you think?
I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. You know what I mean? I get it when it gets way overboard, but I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I want there to be so much more dialogue in the workplace between leaders and employees so we can have a better working relationship.
And that's what I was going to ask. Like, do you think that they're just resorting to the nuclear option without, coming to the table just to talk? Because, if people, if the employees have gone through, they have a bad manager, that's totally understandable. They've gone through the steps to say, hey, we think that, then yes, totally agree with that. But like, I also feel like right now, a lot of people will just go immediately to, we need to fire this person. Yep.
Yeah. So here's kind of my thought on that, which I can't honestly say I've proven yet. But when I see that somebody, people, employees, whoever, bypass whatever system you have or process you have, what it says to me is that there's something else broken there. So either they've tried the process and they don't think it works. And sometimes that's a perception. I work a lot with my clients on remembering to wrap back up with people after they make any kind of complaint. Or so it's either a perception that there's a breakdown, or they actually have experience that things are breaking down. So sometimes in those situations, I want my leaders to kind of look at themselves first and really find out, have they honestly been doing what they should be doing as well? Because I usually feel like anytime for any situation, a process gets circumvented by an employee, I'm always wondering, why did they do that? Like, there usually is something that caused it. Either they were afraid to go to the person they should have gone to, or they tried to go to that person before and they're not taking it seriously, or whatever the issue might be.
Yeah.
So I think I always want to look deeper. It's just like anytime someone tells me they have this employee who their attendance is really bad, and they're kind of so focused on this attendance thing. And I'm like, tell me about their performance in the workplace. And it's like, yeah, attendance is important, whether they're reliable or not, but tell me about their day-to-day performance. Because usually where there's little issues, there's other stuff going on, right? It doesn't usually, like, I'll give you another example. I had a client who was telling me they're rewriting a policy. They're a small business, 5 employees, rewriting a policy because of one employee last year, sort of found a loophole in the policy. And that they, instead of sort of stepping up, in my opinion, and just saying, listen, okay, fine, maybe there's this loophole in the policy, but we're going to clear it up, and this is what we're going to have you do regardless. Now they're rewriting a policy to try to manage the loophole. But all that kept going through in my mind is, you have an employee who found that kind of loophole that made you so mad. They're still working for you, and now you're rewriting a policy for 4 other people because of one person. So I'm guessing that employee, I bet, is not that great of an employee. Now, I know that they would probably argue with me on that. They would say, well, they're good at this, or they're good at this. And I'm like, but if they already found a loophole, like, they're already causing you that kind of grief, that to me says there's probably something else there.
Well, and it's funny you mentioned that, just because I'm sure we've all worked for a company where you're looking at like the handbook and you're like, why is this rule in here? And I guarantee you it goes back to one employee, however many years ago,
Yes.
Yeah, that is exactly, it's like leaders sometimes feel like they've got to rely on a policy for their power. And that is like one of my missions, is like, I want you to, and I use the word power intentionally. It's like, I want you to have your power. And it doesn't mean power to like hang over employees and boss them around, but it's like, be able to talk and be able to speak up and be able to say, okay, yeah, that policy's not written down, but this is what we're doing. Or yeah, it's so fascinating to me how this struggle with conversation it's like the biggest challenge, that a leader just kind of doesn't feel authoritative enough, or I don't even know if that's the right word. Maybe just, I'm going to say confident enough to just have that conversation with the employee.
Yeah. That's a clear example of solving the wrong problem, right?
Yeah.
Clearly solving the wrong problem. This may not be, I don't know, this might not land well with anybody who listens to our podcast who is actually an HR professional, but
Okay.
Why does it feel like the HR people are always the ones that get drunk at the team dinners and gossip the most and are the most catty? Like, what? Like, is it just my experience, or do y'all have that same experience?
Okay, well, I'm going to tell you what I think, but I don't know if this is true. So I was never that person, but I will tell you that my HR career started my second job out of college. And I not only had an amazing regional manager for a mentor, but there's this other woman that worked in another department. Her name was Liz. And man, Liz got me set up right in my career. I didn't like a word she had to say to me, and I thought she was crazy, but she was right. So, plus she was like, at that time she was so old. She was 40, right? She was so old. What does Liz know?
That's ancient. That's ancient.
Yeah, Liz is 40, but she knew a lot. So, okay. So what I think is, and it's funny because in my Cal State Dominguez classes that I would teach, one of the very first nights I would say, how many of you are in HR because you like people? And, most people would raise their hand, and I would say, get out of HR, because That is not what this job is. It's not like, oh, we get to be friends and we get to do that. HR is one of the loneliest professions. If you're good at it, it is one of the loneliest professions because it's very difficult to be friends with people in the company because you have access to all kinds of information. Sometimes you know when someone's getting fired tomorrow, and you know that tonight they're going to buy a car and you can't go tell them not to buy a car, you know all types of things. And I feel like sometimes people they're not ready for that. So they end up not being prepared for what that feels like. And so they don't handle the situation well. And then they're gossiping, they drink too much, things like that.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that you can't, you can be well liked, but really, I would say, honestly, when I was in house, in terms of friends with employees, I wouldn't say anybody was my friend. I would say I liked them. They trusted me. My goal was always that they trusted me and they felt confident that I would do something, that I would help them out of the situation they were in. For leaders, employees, all of them. That was my goal. Did I get invited to any baby showers? Not really. But it's so funny. I got into it just because it was a great opportunity to get me out of what I was doing at the time. And then I ended up really loving it and seeing what I could do. But a lot of people get into it because they think it's going to be this great time to be friends and get to hang out with people and get to know people better. And I'm like, oh goodness.
Right. HR and baby showers are, they kind of go hand in hand, I feel like, in most companies. And Corey and I once consulted for a company where an employee she was pregnant, and we asked if there was going to be a baby shower for the employee. And they're like, yeah, we can't do that because, 18 months ago, Brian's wife was pregnant and we didn't give Brian a baby shower. So we can't do it for this employee either. And I'm like, what? Okay. Strange policy, but sure, whatever.
And it also sounds like you just called all of Julie's past HR people bad at their job.
Yeah. Oh, listen, I will say this, the one thing that kept going through my mind when you were talking about, if you want to be liked, like it's a lonely profession and somebody's going to be fired and you can't say anything, and they're going to buy a new car tonight. There was a time in, my career where I was terminated. I like to call it friendly fired. They called it laid off. I whatever. You call it whatever you want. But the most humiliating part of that experience for me was that I had a ton of friends in that company, and over half of them knew before I did that I was losing my job.
Wow.
And because the HR person could not keep her mouth shut. And it was hard for me to get past that. And I wasn't mad at the people because they didn't tip me off. I was embarrassed that everybody knew something about me before I knew it. And it was just, it was a tough experience for me. And
I hear a lot of stories like that. And it's funny. it's like one of those take it to my grave kind of thing. I still know information on people I still interact with today that nobody knows I know. But that's just to me that was imposed on me like very early in my career. And I just take it really seriously. I feel like that's my job, but it makes it very lonely and hard because it's not like you can really talk to people. You can go, if you have a significant other at home, obviously you can go home and kind of voice that, but really in terms of it makes it hard when it comes to being at work and you don't really have somebody, I just got to vent about this, and it's not like that. And that has been for me in small companies, big companies, it doesn't matter the size. I've just kept that always.
Well, that makes you exceptional at HR. And with that, I think we have to wrap up, but this has been really, really good. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Tell our listeners how they can find you.
So please find me on Instagram and LinkedIn at Anne Laguzza. And I'm also on Facebook at The Works HR, and I post regularly. And I also, Julie, I think you might know this, but I have an Alexa skill now, which is a Hey Anne Alexa skill. So you download Hey Anne, you tell her to open Hey Anne every day, and she's going to give you a brand new leadership tip every single day.
That's fantastic. Cool. I love it.
Yeah, well, thanks again. And hopefully we can get you back on the show sometime.
Yeah,
absolutely. I love it.
You can connect with us on social media. We are on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and the Twitter. You can also reach us on our websites, svpace.com and bizquickpodcast.com.
And while you're out there on the internet, subscribe to this pod and let us know what you think. Like us and give us a review as well, because that helps us make this podcast better.
Yes, please give us a review. And if there's any topics you're interested in hearing about, reach out to us and let us know, and we will find an expert and get that person on the show. Oh, hey, we wrote a book. It's called Seriously, Now What? A Small Business Guide to Disaster Preparedness. And you can find that book on Amazon or link to it directly through our website. And guess what? It has a companion workbook.
So that's it for the pod today. I'm Corey.
And I'm Julie.
And this was BizQuik, helping small businesses across America.